Okay, so now let's talk about immigrant generations. And this will help put some of the immigration debates and things that we've been talking about into perspective. Immigrant generations. The children of immigrants are the focus of a growing body of research, not just in anthropology, but in lots and lots of different social sciences, because immigration is on the rise. More and more people are expected to immigrate in the future as global temperatures rise and force people to move around, along with the economy growing and transportation continuing to get cheaper and faster, etc. These things I keep mentioning. So, first generation immigrant, we hear that all the time. What does it mean? That is an immigrant who left their home country as an adult. If you leave your home country as an adult, move to another country, you are a first generation immigrant. So, I would have been a first generation immigrant, having left South Korea when I was, I think, 22 or something like that when I graduated college. I was kind of older to graduate college. Now, there's 1.5 generation, and this is something that doesn't get talked about very much. That's children that are born in the home country who then migrate with their parents and grow up in the host country. Depending on the age at migration, these children experience a doubly complex enculturation process. And now that we know a little bit about enculturation, the difficulty in learning languages, things like that, it is hopefully you can appreciate what a 1.5 generation is and why we make a distinction between first generation, 1.5 generation, and second generation. 1.5 generation are children that are sort of betwixt and between. And of course, this is what we might call dreamers in the United States, oftentimes, people who are sort of not quite accepted by their host country, but not exactly entirely divorced from the country in which them and their parents might have come from. So, second generation, children of the first generation who are born and raised in the new host country. As you read your book, it'll tell you, most of the time, second generation children are almost fully culturally integrated into the host country. Not without some variation, but we like variation. This is the United States. We like cultural variation. I'm an anthropologist. I like cultural variation. But so they're typically fluent in the language, all of these kinds of things. So are 1.5 generation people. So, I'd like you to think, and you might not all know the answer to this, but typically this is an exercise I would do in class with each other. I'd put you into small groups and I'd ask you, what generation are you? Virtually everyone in the United States is an immigrant. In fact, if we go back on far enough of a timeline, even people who are Native American, Native Americans that were here when the Mayflower landed are also immigrants because on a long enough time scale, we all immigrated here from Africa. But I'm not asking us to go even back that far. If you are a Native American person, that is great, and maybe you could talk about that in your small group or in this question, right? But if you're not a Native American, you are an immigrant to the United States at some point. So, how many do you happen to know how many generations of immigrant you are? What generation immigrant are you to the United States? Now, many of you might not know what generation immigrant you are to the United States, but you might have a guess. And typically, what ends up happening is I ask people to raise their hands, and I've never gotten anybody who knows for sure that they are more than fifth or sixth generation. A lot of the times, most of the class think or suspect that they're around second or third generation, or many people happen to know they are second or third generation immigrant, especially in this part of the country. And then a few others might be longer, but very few students can say for sure that they know that they are more than about 6 generations, 5 generations of immigration away from wherever it is that they immigrated from. And that's just not a very long time. The United States is a country of immigrants, especially when we, again, look at this historical perspective, that is the perspective of anthropology, that we all emigrated from Africa several thousands of years ago. To say that we are just a few generations away from being an immigrant in the United States is striking, particularly because of the ways that we tend to stigmatize immigrants who are very recent to the United States, and the way that immigrants who are recent to the United States tend to end up getting rather demonized in the popular media. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, simply read your book, and your book has dozens of examples of exactly what I'm talking about. So I hope this exercise is helpful to you. And again, maybe your family goes back generations, I don't know. But I haven't run across too many people that go back more than 5 or 6. Oh, I should have gone to the next slide because that has these questions. So here are these slides for you if you want to know. So next thing I want you to do, I want you to watch the video by Jason De Leon. He is an archaeologist. I have him in the very next video. He's an archaeologist that studies the Mexican-American border. He's going to give you a little bit of an idea of what it is like to emigrate to the United States. Not emigrate, I shouldn't use that word, but what it is like crossing the border from Mexico to the United States, either to seek work or seek asylum. We often don't ask that, and typically when most Americans think about the border, they think about something like this. Now, one of these images is actually American Border Control patrolling the United States border with Mexico. The other one is actually Border Patrol agents patrolling one of the national parks in Kenya, which we were discussing and watched a documentary on in Milking the Rhino. And this goes back to that idea that was in that documentary of command and control, a border or a fence where you have a lot of fences, a lot of razor wire, a lot of people with guns walking around, constant border controls. And we've studied this issue in Africa and the way that even in these small national wildlife parks, there are so many pushes and pulls, pushing people into wildlife areas and the valuable meat and tusks and other things that draw people in to try to kill wildlife, that this command and control model ultimately failed. And I'm wondering how you think those lessons might apply to the American border situation, where we have a huge, massive border, far bigger than any of these really rather tiny national parks that they have in Africa, and yet we are also trying to do this command and control model. As we might know, the former president ran on this idea that he was going to build this massive border wall, and that was going to have somehow keep immigrants out. But if you've read this chapter, I think you might get the idea that there are too many pushes and control pulls, bridges and barriers trying to get immigrants into the United States, that I don't think that's going to work. And you can also go online and do, I don't know, milk crate challenge and watch all these different YouTube videos of people defeating the proposed border wall with the United States and Mexico with very common hardware store items, a rope and hook, milk crates and all these shovel. It is a very, very expensive wall that is rather easy to defeat. And so some people have argued, well, maybe just like in Africa and other borders and walls and barriers that we've tried to erect that typically have not worked, including the Great Wall of China, that did not work really. That's a long historical. I shouldn't even bring that up because there's a lot of nuance to that discussion. But instead of this, some advocates have argued for what we call open borders. Many anthropologists also argue for open borders, but that is an extreme political view. Or considered an extreme political view in the United States, but open border advocates argue that free migration would be the most effective way to reduce global poverty. And the literature on this goes back very long. So I have two articles I'd like you to read. One, which is a case for immigration and how it helps both the United States economy and also economies in other in other countries, but also an argument, a opinion piece about open borders. But what I want you to keep in mind when you're reading this is there is a lot of gray area between a massive border wall that lets nobody in and has full of people with guns and military, and totally open borders with absolutely no rules. Like, there is a huge spectrum of other kinds of ideas and other policy choices that we could make that is not one of these big, massive extremes. But I would like you to read Open Borders, because oftentimes as Americans we don't really get exposed to that side of the argument. Read it, and then your forum post will be comparing and contrasting open borders with other types of immigration policies. Okay? And again, open borders is something that anthropologists might argue for a lot, but I'm not asking you to make this your argument. I'm asking you to engage with that side of the argument, okay? You are free to express. It's a very political subject, so you are free to express whatever your opinion might be. Obviously, in the forum, please keep it simple, but I am curious what you all think, all right? Have a good one.